Hi, Martin Turner here. This week we look at restating our firm's balance sheet and discuss some common questions people have so far. And first, let us remind ourselves about why we are doing the learning task of restating our firm's financial statements.
Hi, Martin Turner here, and welcome to our Week 6 lecture in ACCT11059, Accounting, Learning and Online Communication. And we'll be doing our second week at looking at analysing financial statements. Now, our agenda today is we're looking at restating, and we'll be focusing on the balance sheet today. We're looking at the why and some common questions and some tips on how to, particularly if our balance sheet doesn't quite balance, how to sort that out. And then we'll have a minute paper. So why do we restate? Now, the reason we're doing this task, this is a learning task for us, is to help us become familiar with financial statements. You've had a go at inputting your financial statements, your firm, into a spreadsheet, and we've been looking at some general issues. But as we do the restatement, it gives you a chance to look at each individual item in your financial statements and you reallocate them into operating and financial items. Now, this learning task is not about learning to restate, although we will be doing that. And it's an authentic task. It's something people really do in real life. It's equity analysts in the listed share markets or in the private equity markets. And people analysing firms will do this task, separate the operating financial activities at the very beginning before they start analysing the firms. And a lot of people value firms based in our capital markets based on enterprise value, which is focusing on the operating activities. So you have to separate the operating and financial activities first. So we're learning to become, so it's a task where we can become a bit more familiar with my friends at Financial Statements. I'm helping introduce you to them. And it also helps us to learn to use Excel a bit more. There's some people come to the unit with really good Excel skills, just a few generally. So they're good people to get to know in the unit. But for most of us in the unit, you're just going to be helping to develop your Excel skills just by using them and get a bit of practice. And particularly with restating, we'll be linking cells between worksheets, which is an important skill. So that's why we're doing it. We're doing it to become more familiar with our financial statements. Now, some common questions. Some people may find in their balance sheet that they have net liabilities and not net assets. There's a few people like that. So what do I do if I have net liabilities, not net assets? Basically, you just treat it the same way. You're going to have net liabilities. You can also discuss with me or other people in the teaching staff, if you happen to have that, or post some questions just to make sure that you've got everything working right in your restatements. Sometimes it's just a question of making sure you've got some of your formulas in your subtotals right. But yeah, some people have net assets is where you have more assets than liabilities. Net liabilities is where you have more liabilities than assets. So when you're doing your net operating assets, that's where you've got more operating assets than operating liabilities. But a few people may find they have more operating liabilities than operating assets, and so have a negative net operating assets or net operating liabilities. So don't worry if you've got that. But why do some of my lines go bold? Does formatting really matter? Why can't I just leave it as it is without making it pretty? Some people, a lot of people get their formatting really great, but some people, oh man, things go awry. Suddenly, things are going bold or formatting's going awry. Those little coloured lines get out of whack. Is it important to get the formatting right? Some people ask, or can I just leave it? Well, accounting is about communication. It's about people. It's about giving advice to people. And when we had our guest speaker early in the term, when they were talking about the things they were looking for from graduates, they never mentioned numbers or anything like that. They're looking at the communication skills. They're looking at both written and verbal, and their ability to analyse and give advice, and work well with other people. So business accounting is just like other business disciplines. It's about people fundamentally. And part of that is when we are doing any analysis, say using Excel, we then going to need to communicate that to somebody. So how it looks counts. It's all part of this. We've got to be able to tell the stories. And so formatting does matter. And we need to develop those skills in Excel. So for some people, they've got great skills. Other people, there's a chance to develop them some more. If you get your blue and white lines out of whack because you've been moving things around, Format Painter is the way to go to get all those lines right. And you can talk to other people about how to use that, but it's just in the top left-hand corner towards the top left-hand corner of your Excel. And you can use that function and you can talk to each other about how to do it. Also, getting things bold or in the right format, getting it to look like it's easy to read. All these things are important. And so it's not so much about making it pretty, but it's making it clear. And so spend a little bit of time getting the formatting in some sort of good shape. We're not trying to kill you. You don't lose marks if your formatting is awry, but these are important skills to develop. And so here's a chance to develop some of your Excel skills in doing this task. If I don't have a number for 1 year, do I just put a dash in the cell? What you might find is that sometimes you don't have a certain item may be, say, in your balance sheet in some years, but not others. And so what do you do when you find there's not an item 1 year? Put a 0 in that cell. Don't put a dash. The reason is you can't add up dashes. A dash will be a label, whereas a 0 will be a number. So put a 0 in the cell. Don't put dashes. Often in the financial statements in your annual report, the zeros might be a dash too sometimes in the items. So just put a 0, not a dash. Why do some of my statements say as at instead of for the year ended? Now, the statement of changes in equity and the income statement are both for the year ended, therefore a period. But when we come to the balance sheet, is as at. So Ryman Healthcare's balance sheet is as at the 31st of March. What that means is that each item in the balance sheet is the figure for that item for just 1 day, the 31st of March, whatever year it is. Whereas the figures in the statement of changes in equity and the income statement are for the period, for the year end. So revenue and expenses are for a period. And also the statement of change in equity is the changes in equity over that period from opening balance to closing balance, from one balance sheet to the next. So that's why some of the statements, the balance sheet says as at, and the other two say for the year ended. Now, my balance sheet says total assets, but my friends says net assets. What's the difference? So some people find as they're comparing their financial statements with other people's is that they can be presented differently. And so most balance sheets will show you the total assets and then they'll show you the total liabilities. But some will also show you the net assets, which is the total assets less the total liabilities. And then they'll show the net assets and that will equal the equity, the total equity. So some people set it out like that, quite a few, and other people don't. They will show the total assets, then they'll show the total liabilities, and then they'll show the equity, and they may then show the total equity and total assets, the total equity and total liabilities, which will equal the total assets. So there can be some differences in how the various financial statements are presented from company to company. There's basically no rules around formatting. There's a few actually, but pretty well there's a lot of choice. So people can set them out in different ways. Also, we've learned that people can use different terms for the same items or the same terms for different items, because there's no common terms in accounting as well. And so there can be quite a bit of variation. But nevertheless, we also see quite a lot of similarities as well between the various financial statements with our different firms. I have two balance sheets in my annual report. Which one do I use? One says concise balance sheet, and the other one says consolidated statement of financial position. So some people have concise financial statements in their annual reports, and others don't. But if your firm does have any sort of concise or summary financial statements, we're not focusing on that. We're focusing on the full financial statements, the full meat and potatoes. And with the full financial statements, they have footnotes for different items. All the items are there, and then they've got a whole lot of footnotes. So you can go into the footnotes to check what they are. When you're doing your restatements, if you want to, you can look into the footnotes, and that might help you decide whether they're operating or financial. Do I have to link cells between worksheets? Yes. Make sure you link cells between worksheets. You must do that. That's a requirement in the assignment. We want you to get some practice of linking cells between worksheets. That's an important skill. The reason that's an important skill for Excel is that you enter the numbers in one place. So for us, we're entering some numbers in the financial statements worksheet. Then we're linking them to the restated financial worksheet. And then we're also going to be linking both numbers from the financial statements worksheet and the restated financial worksheets to the ratio worksheet. Now, if we link the cells between worksheets, then and we've only put them into, say, the financial statements worksheet originally, then say we discover we put an error into, say, the financial statements worksheet and we correct it, that will flow through automatically to all the other parts of all our other worksheets. And so linking cells between worksheets is a key thing in Excel. So you'll get lots of practice of doing that. So how do we restate? Well, Maria's videos. Some people, what we suggest you do is you read chapter 4 and you do your assignment 2, step 1. And a lot of people can find that a bit confusing. You know, they're picking this up and wondering. Other people can get right into it. So there's a whole range of different responses to it. Then have a look at Maria's videos. And there's one on each of the financial statements. The statement of changes in equity, the balance sheet, and the income statement. Now, these links are live in the slides and week 4 tile. And Maria's videos, and there are also links in the assignments. Also in the feedback you get from assignment 2, step 1, we give you the live links to these. So when you get ready, you've read chapter 4, now sit with Maria's videos, start with the statement of changes in equity, and you have your spreadsheet open, watch the video. You can stop the video and work on your spreadsheet as you go and get your spreadsheet finished. And you can do the same with the balance sheet and then the income statement. Maria takes you through her company, and which is West Farmers. Your farm company will be a bit different, so you can't just copy what she's doing, but she's show you the steps that you have to do. And you can just sort of turn the videos off and on and work through. And the other thing is you'll have, you could easily get a few questions. Yours company will be a bit different to Maria's. If you're thinking through that, you can discuss with other people, share your draft work, And everyone who does that, and a bit like Holly and Misty and Cairns, you know, they're in a bit of a study group up there, and there's numbers of people in different study groups, and also just talking with each other, you can solve those issues quite quickly. Now, when we come to the balance sheet, so chapter 4, we'll focus on this now. Chapter 4, pages 9 to 15 in chapter 4, restating the balance sheet. So read the study guide and then look at Maria's video on the balance sheet. Now, when we restate the balance sheet, there'll be a new accounting equation. Net operating assets equals net financial obligations plus equity. Now, we know that the accounting equation is assets equals equity plus liabilities, or assets equals liabilities plus equity. But in the way we're formatting the balance sheet when we restate it, we're going to put the operating assets less the operating liabilities together to calculate the net operating assets. So the net operating assets is actually, operating assets less operating liabilities. So we're sort of netting some assets, our operating assets and our operating liabilities, netting them off against each other to get net operating assets rather than, say, total assets. And the net financial obligations, that's our financial obligations minus our financial assets. Usually our firm has more financial obligations than financial assets, and so we'll have net financial obligations. Some people may have more financial assets. They may have a lot. Your firm may have a lot of cash that's a financial asset, and that may be more. You may have very little borrowings. But so some firms have net financial assets, but many have net financial obligations, and then we have equity. So for many people, they'll be setting it out: net operating assets equals net financial obligations plus equity. That's the new accounting equation that we have in the balance sheet. Make sure you link the cells between worksheets. Most people get that, but make sure you do that. And the trick, one of the main thing that's a little bit tricky is splitting cash into operating and financial. The reason that's a little bit tricky is it's often not disclosed. It's what cash is needed in the operations and what cash is just is a financial asset, just a store of value. And so I suggest a little rule of thumb that you consider 1% of revenue as cash equal to 1% of revenue as being operating. That's what you need to run your business. We all need a little bit of cash to even out the cash flows as we're going through the year in our business, as cash is going in and out of our business as part of the operations, and then put the rest as financial assets. And that's just a store of value. The money is just held in cash waiting to be used for some purpose. So again, if you follow Maria's video, she sets it out how to split the cash into operating and financial, and most people find that fine. But what happens if things go wrong? What happens if your balance sheet doesn't balance? Your restated balance sheet doesn't balance. What do you do then? So how can I check that I've got it right? It might balance, but how do I know it's right? Well, particularly if your balance sheet doesn't balance, you can do this little check. You can add together your operating assets and financial assets. So in your restated balance sheet, add the operating assets and financial assets, and then compare it to the total assets in your financial statements, your original financial statements. If they are the same, that's good. If they're not, then you've got some error in your operating assets or financial assets. You've made some error in there. And then also you can add the operating liabilities plus financial liabilities, which should equal your total liabilities. So your operating liabilities and financial liabilities from your restated financial statements, and see if they're the same as the total liabilities from your financial statements. If they're the same, that's good, but if they're not, then you need to look into the liability side. So what can happen if you've made an error? Then by doing that, you'll identify whether it's in your assets or in your liabilities. Then you can go into those areas and there's some problem in there, and you can be a bit more focused on finding the problem. So that's one of the tips that can be useful to help figure it out. And what if I have net financial assets instead of net financial obligations? So this will happen to a few people. Net financial assets, you might have a lot of cash and not much borrowings, and you end up having net financial assets. Your financial assets are greater than your financial obligations. Instead of what most people will have is net financial obligations, NFO, which is Ryman Healthcare has. Now, we saw that the formula is net operating assets equals net financial obligations plus equity. That's the accounting equation underpinning our balance sheet when we've restated it. But if you've got net financial assets, then that equation is net operating assets equals net financial assets minus equity. So it changes. So you don't add net financial assets and equity, you subtract them. And if that balances, then that's good. Sometimes people add the net financial assets and equity together and it doesn't balance with the net operating assets and they think there's a problem, but in fact they might have it completely right. So that's the thing to focus on if you've got net financial assets. Very good. Now, what was the most important thing you learned today? You might say absolutely nothing. I'm right on top of my restatements. But what was the most important thing you learned today and what questions remain unanswered? So go into Socrative and answer these two questions. What was the most important thing you learned today and what questions still remain unanswered? We'll start with Sophia. Sophia in Brisbane said that there are videos to help me with the restatements. That was the most important thing you learned today. You didn't know about that before, Sophia? That is a very valuable thing. What was the most important thing you learned today? How do we access Socrative? Well, Jade, you go to the week 6. You go to the classes and recordings tile, and there's a click where you're linked in to get into Zoom, but there's also a link there to get into Socrative. So go into the classes and record. Found it, excellent. Anita, how to restate financial statements and how to read them. Yeah, so this is your task at the moment, is to restate your financial statements. And so we just looked at a few questions people have and some of the issues around it. But Imogen Richter, how to restate the financial statements. Yeah, that's what we've been looking at. Jade in Townsville, the new accounting equation. Yeah, it's just a rejigging of the accounting equation, but that's right. We'll be setting it out. We'll be putting operating assets less operating liabilities to get net operating assets. So that's what we'll be identifying when we restate, and that'll help us with some of the ratios and some of the things we look at. Net operating assets equals net financial obligations. Again, we put the financial assets and the financial obligations less financial assets, plus equity. Yeah, that new accounting equation, if you like, that's what pops out of our restated balance sheet. And also as we restate the financial statements, we'll be looking, it's a sort of new accounting equation in the sense that we've separated out the operating and the financial activities. We've clearly separated them out. And that's something of a lot of interest to analysts and to people who are wanting to come to grips with value in business. And what's happened over the last 10 years really is increasingly the financial statements are being set up in a way to separate the operating and financial activities a little bit more clearly. Some people ask me, a lot of people ask me actually, why aren't the financial statements, why don't they already just show the different, separate the operating and financial activities? If it's so useful, why don't they just do it? Why do we have to do it extra? And that's a good question. And they are all mixed up a bit, but they're becoming mixed up less and less. And there's a gradual trend to show them separate. And I expect that will continue. Carolyn Craignish, operating assets plus financial assets equals total assets. Operating liability plus financial liabilities equals total total liabilities. Go back to financial statements to check if it's the same. If not, there is an error in assets or liabilities. That was the most important thing you learned today, Carolyn. If your balance sheet doesn't balance, that is a great thing to do, to try and identify whether the error is in your assets or in your liabilities. It might be, you might have made a few errors and it's in both, but that's the first step. That's right. That's a really good tip. And say your operating liabilities and financial liabilities equal your total liabilities, well, then that's looking good. So you can just focus on your assets if that's where the error is. That is a good tip. And so that was the most useful thing you learned. Joseph in Gin that I have to link cells across worksheets. That's right. So make sure you link them. It's the easiest way to do it anyway. It's not hard to link once you get used to it. And that communication is a big part of accounting. Joseph, that is such a great insight. We all know, these bean counters, we call them bean counters. We've all come across accountants over the years who seem to just sit in the back office, produce stuff, and they send out reports that are really hard to follow. They're just messed up. And those sort of accountants haven't realised that communication is a big part of accounting. It's about communicating the key parts of your analysis, and you'll get some chances in our unit to do that. There's lots of numbers in accounting, but more and more they're being automated, how we deal with them. And increasingly, a bigger and bigger part of accounting is communicating our analyses. So problem solving, thinking about what the numbers are meaning. And you'll get a bit of a chance to do that when you look at your ratios, for example. That's a good insight, Joseph. Tyler in Rockhampton, finding out about Maria's videos. A few people are in that. You definitely want to focus. Now, the links to Maria's videos are in the assignment as well. So reading the assignment instructions carefully is a great idea. There's all sorts of stuff in there. And how to edit the new financial equation depending on if you have financial obligations or assets. That's another good thing, Tyler. So if you've got net financial obligations, then it's like most people. But if you've got net financial assets, then use that equation where you subtract so you have the net financial assets equals net financial obligations minus the equity to get it to balance. No, they're good. That's excellent, Tyler. And that is the idea of this lecture, is to just give you some tips on where you're up to. And Derek in Brisbane, key understanding net operating assets equals net financial assets minus equity. That's the same as Tyler. That's if you've got net financial assets. If you've got net financial obligations, it's net operating assets equals net financial obligations plus equity. But that's good. There'll be a number of people with net financial assets. All right, let's have a look at what questions remain unanswered. Anita, none at the moment. Carolyn. Oh, Derek, interested to understand ratios and get cracking. That's right. Once you've done your restated financial statements, move straight into the ratios. Again, it's just linking cells between worksheets. Just follow the instruction. The ratios are all described there. Do it carefully, and then you can have a crack at seeing what stories come out of your ratios. Carolyn Craignish, I have to recheck my restated financial statements due to errors. Carolyn, things aren't balancing. This can feel quite stressful. In accounting, we just love it when things balance. We can't help ourselves. It is so good when things balance. When you do your restatements and things sort of balance, it's all hanging together, you can't help it. Good about it. That never goes away. But when they don't balance, you can start thinking, what? And but by them not balancing, it's actually a good thing. The reason it's a good thing is that it just helps you go back and look through them again. If you can just keep your cool, don't get stressed, just go back and pick if you can target where the errors might be, and just have a look at each item and see where they are. That's all good because you'll learn a lot. From when you identify the error, you'll see what you did wrong. Quite often it's just a bit of carelessness. You put some number in wrong, or you linked it wrong, made some sort of error. It's very easy to do that. There are some skills in not making so many errors, because the way you check things, a bit like having subtotals without financial statements and calculating them and checking them against the original annual report numbers. So there's some ways of checking them. But Carolyn, that's good. So have a go at that, and just the idea is to narrow down as much as you can where the errors might be, and then to have a look at those items. But it's quite a good thing. It helps you get to know my good personal friends, the financial statements, a bit better. Again, you can talk with each other. If you've got some problem with something not balancing, there'll be other people with the same problems. So you can just discuss. Sophia in Brisbane, none at the moment. I just got to watch those videos. Watch the Maria's videos to check if I'm on the right track on my restatement. That's good. If you're partway through, you can just go through the videos and watch them. And if you see anything that you need to fix up or you might have missed, you can do it that way. Jade in Townsville, adding tax at the end of balance sheet, how to find it? Adding tax. Are you talking about the income statement, Jade, or how to find it? Not quite sure what question you're asking. Jade, do you want to ask that, or do you want to?
It was in like the last 5 minutes of Maria's video, and she said it was separate to, like, it's not often calculated and we have to calculate it ourselves.
Yeah, you're separating tax between operating and financial.
I believe so.
Yeah, and that would be in the income statement.
Yeah, she said that sometimes it's not, and you have to try to find it or calculate it yourself.
Yeah,
But it wasn't very clear to me. I haven't had an issue with it yet, but I just just wanted to make sure I knew the process properly.
Yeah, it is a little bit tricky, because it's just like in the balance sheet, they don't separate cash, operating and financial, so we need to make a few judgments. They also don't separate tax between operating and financial in the income statement. So this is in the income statement. They just have one item called income tax expense. So how do we separate that between operating and financial? So that's just one item. You are going to need to separate it. Just follow the steps. They're in the study guide as well, and also in Maria's video on income statement. So just follow those steps. Everybody's got to do the same thing. So if you find yourself getting in a bit unstuck, you can just ask others as well. But what we suggest, what the process we do, you see, the reason we separate tax between operating and financial is because the more borrowings you make, say Ryman Healthcare, the more it borrows, then the more interest it will pay. And it gets a tax deduction for the interest it pays. So the more a company borrows and the more interest it pays, the less company tax it will pay, because it'll get more and more deductions for the interest. So we need to separate the tax out so that if we're going to separate operating and financial, and we look at the operating income and the net financial expenses, we look at those after tax. So what we do is, when you're looking at the net financial expenses, we calculate the tax benefit of having those borrowings or having those net interest payments. And so we times the net financial expenses by our company tax rate, because that's the amount of less tax we'll pay. And then we take that tax benefit, we reduce our net financial expenses by that tax benefit. And then, of course, we need to adjust our operating tax. So in the operating side, we put the tax expense, but then we've got to increase that tax expense for the tax benefit that we had of having the interest deductions. So that's how we do that. Tax can sometimes get a little bit confusing, but that's, I find most people can do it fine. So you'll probably get it without too much trouble. But you just have to follow those instructions of how we separate that out. And so you're separating out the tax benefit. And so the interest expense in your operating side will be the income tax expense you had, plus the tax benefit, plus the benefit of having those tax deductions. So in other words, it's really the tax you would have paid if you didn't have any borrowings. And that's what we have on the operating side. And then we reduce our net financial expenses by the tax benefit. I don't know if that helped, Jade, but that's, does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it does. I think as I run into it a bit more and practice it a bit more as well, it'll make more sense.
Yeah. Don't sweat it too much. We're just trying to get to know our financial statements better, but that's a little bit of a technical thing to get right. But everybody will have basically the same issues with that. So you can talk to each other. And also when you share your draft work, people you might be something you ask people to have a look at, see if they think you've got it right. Imogen, why is it important to restate the financial statements? A number of people will have this question. Another version of it is, why am I doing this? Why am I restating the financial statements? Particularly if you find it a little bit difficult. Why is it important to do this? Well, it is an actual task that people do. It's an authentic task. But analysts it would take them about 2 or 3 minutes. They don't take a minute or two to restate the financial statements in this way. If you know what all the items, it's very easy just to put no and an F next to the items if you know what they all are, and then just quickly move them around between operating and financial. It's quite quick. And these other little things, if you're experienced, it's quite quick. But you're not experienced. You haven't done this before. So, and one of the challenges is that you don't know what some of these items actually are. And some of them have some pretty crazy names. So it's quite a useful task. So first of all, restating the financial statements is an authentic task. It's real. People actually do it. Analysts, you may never do it in your life, obviously. If you're not an equity analyst or you're not trying to value firms in this way, to value their enterprise value, you may quite likely never do it in your life. So we're not trying to teach you how to restate financial statements. What we're trying to do is use this authentic task, it's a real task, to help you get to know it. Just have a look at each item in the financial statements. So it supports you to have a bit of a better look at the financial statements. You've got a little bit of a look at it when you put them into your spreadsheet. That's quite a helpful thing. You get sort of seeing it. Now, as you do the restatement, you'll look at each item and say, is it operating and financial? And so you're getting a little bit of familiarity with each item. So that's why we're doing it. We're doing it to get to know the financial statements better. And we're doing it to also, by linking between worksheets and so on, you're just helping to develop your Excel skills a little bit as well. But Imogen, you may very likely never restate financial statements like this again in your life. So we're not trying to teach you how to do it. We're just using this authentic task, a real task that people do in certain situations, as a way of helping you to get to know your financial statements better. And the idea is that at the end of this unit, you'll say to yourself, at the beginning, a lot of people say that financial statements look very scary. They've got a lot of numbers and they all look a bit strange. Because you don't know them, they're new people, you haven't come across them before. But at the end of the unit, the idea is that you'll feel more familiar with them. You won't know everything. There's a whole heap of technical stuff. And for those who are studying accounting, you'll go into a lot more technical things. But either whether you're studying accounting or not, this will give you a bit of an introduction to the financial statements, and they won't seem so scary. You will come across financial statements in your business lives and lives generally. And so being not scared of them and being able to sort of engage with them will be useful. So we're learning about financial statements. We're not learning about how to restate them. That's not the purpose. we're learning. The idea is it just supports you to look at each item in the financial statements. All right. So that was the minute paper. So what have we done today? We've had a look at restating, why we're doing it. We're not doing it to learn about restating for that. It's a technical task that only certain people might do in their careers. But it's to help us get to know item by item our financial statements a bit better, because we're going to move each item around between O and F. That just supports us to have a look at each item. We looked at some common questions people have, that you might have, and as you're going about it, and some tips around the balance sheet, for example, about how to help identify errors in your balance sheet if it's not balancing. And then we had the minute paper. Well, we'll be in the tutorial this week. We'll be able to ask questions. We'll be focusing on assignment 2, step 3, restating the balance sheet and income statement, and also on the distinction between operating and financial activities. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and I look forward to continuing working with you in the coming week. Bye for now. Bye-bye.